Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news, so if you haven't had time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. Stay tuned for our weekly review where we'll give you the scoop on the biggest stories that you may have missed in the last 7 days, right from Tel Aviv. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for joining us. The votes are in and the ballot counts are nearly complete as the final results of the United States midterm elections stream out, and it looks like the Democrats have retaken the House of Representatives while the Republicans retained the Senate. The outcomes were very close, though, with the final tally still pending as of this report. But for now, at least, the Democrats have claimed 222 seats in the House of Representatives against the Republicans' 199. And Republicans in the Senate expanded upon their majority with 51 seats to the Democrats' 45. Many view the results as a win for the Trump administration, though, as it at least held on to the upper house of Congress, preventing what could have become a lame duck period for his presidency. But still, with a Democratic majority now in the lower house, it's likely that most bills being brought up through the government will at least begin with language the American political left prefers. The Democrats will now also be more capable of blocking Republican Party-supported legislation, as well as wielding subpoena power within the Congress, paving the way for major opposition against the president's aides and unilateral decisions. Chief among the topics they reportedly intend to target first are the Iranian nuclear deal, which President Trump pulled out of in May, and alleged Russian collusions in American government. Many Israel advocates, however, are apprehensive with the new results, as several candidates like Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are seen as hostile to the Jewish state, were elected. Tlaib, who ran unopposed in Michigan, has called for defunding Israel's military assistance programs and has even endorsed a one-state solution for the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Time will tell how their rhetoric on the campaign trail will translate into action. But in other news, this election was also a record setter for American women, as more women have now been voted into office in the United States than ever before. Here's how some of the new winners reacted.
They want leaders who are going to tackle the big problems. And they want leaders who are going to be there to work with the president and keep this nation on the path to prosperity that we are on today.
This is what can happen when everyday citizens realize their collective strength in a democracy. And when they join with their neighbors to stand up for what they believe in and they use their voices at the polls.
No matter who you might have supported or endorsed in this election, I want you to know that I want to be your governor. I'm running to represent all Iowans in every single corner of this state, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to do that.
So thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your prayers. May God bless you, and may God bless the great state of South Dakota. Thank you.
I'm in this, a woman doctor, of course, so that women can make our own healthcare decisions.
The new list of renewed American sanctions against Iran has been imposed and publicly detailed now, much to the chagrin of the hardline Islamic regime. And these sanctions particularly target Iran's booming oil industry, which is a vital source of income for their struggling economy. The Iranian economy has sharply sunken over the past year, causing massive inflation. Still, the White House insists that the sanctions are not intended to overthrow the government, but rather to cripple Iran's oil-dependent economy, force Iran to dispose of its nuclear ambitions, and persuade it to stop supporting regional terror group proxies. The sanctions cover 50 Iranian banks and subsidiaries, the shipping sector, Iran's national airline, over 65 of its aircrafts, and Iran's atomic energy organization.
We're going to have sanctions that even go beyond this. We're not simply going to be content with the level of sanctions that existed under Obama in 2015. More are coming, and even more important, perhaps, we are actually going to have very strict, very tight enforcement of the sanctions that do exist. Iran right now is in the escape and evasion mode. They're going to try and get around the sanctions. We're determined to prevent that.
As for the countries given temporary exemptions, they will now have to deposit all revenue into an escrow account, which Tehran will only be allowed to use for humanitarian purposes. United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo discussed the waivers, which were issued to countries which have already cut purchases of Iranian crude oil over the past 6 months.
The Iranian regime has a choice. It can either do a 180-degree turn from its outlaw course of action and act like a normal country, or it can see its economy crumble. We hope a new agreement with Iran is possible, but until Iran makes changes in the 12 ways that I listed in May, we will be relentless in exerting pressure on the regime.
But in light of the new sanctions, Iranian President Rouhani has warned that, quote, "We are in the economic war situation. We are confronting a bullying enemy. We have to stand to win," end quote. He then compared Iran's current situation involving the United States with the war against Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein in the 1980s. Military drills have also been reportedly ramped up. Finally, Rouhani also claimed that 4 powers met with Iran in September during the United Nations General Assembly to attempt to salvage the deal. Although he did not name the countries, authorities speculate that they are China, France, Russia, and Britain, who have all already made their criticisms of the White House's actions clear. A Palestinian man attempted to stab an Israeli soldier at the entrance to Kiryat Arba near Hebron on Monday. The suspect was shot and lightly wounded, and no Israelis were injured in the attack. Kiryat Arba is near the city of Hebron, where Palestinians live in close proximity to Israelis and Israeli settlers. The city is also home to the Tomb of the Patriarchs, which has been the scene of many attacks and attempted attacks over the years. Just last month, a Palestinian attempted to stab a soldier at the holy site and was shot dead as a result. The soldier was slightly injured. But while we hear of many incidents of violence, the head of the Shin Bet says there would be many more if not for them. Shin Bet director Nadav Argaman said that his agency prevented 480 Palestinian terror attacks this year, referring also to 590 potential lone wolf attacks that the Shin Bet had thwarted. Argaman mentioned that Hamas offices in Gaza and Turkey attempted to orchestrate attacks in the West Bank, while Hezbollah had plans for similar efforts from Lebanon as well. But thankfully, these attacks were put to rest before they began, thanks to Argaman himself reportedly liaising between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority. Meanwhile, the PLO recently voted to discontinue cooperation between security forces in the Shin Bet and the IDF, but Abbas has not yet approved it. Many believe Abbas will not approve this vote anyhow, though, as Israel's help also suppresses Hamas's presence in the West Bank. During a press conference in Bulgaria on Friday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu finally broke his silence regarding the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Netanyahu was quoted saying that, quote, "What happened in the Istanbul consulate was horrendous and it should be duly dealt with. Yet at this time, it's very important that Saudi Arabia remains stable," end quote. Jamal Khashoggi is suspected to have been murdered by Saudi agents after he entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And while his case has made waves across the whole world, it's not surprising that this is Netanyahu's reaction. Israel and Saudi Arabia do not have diplomatic relations publicly, but they do share intelligence on their mutual enemies, particularly Iran. Netanyahu is hoping for Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to eventually recognize Israel publicly in the Arab world too. That's in part why the Israeli premier shifted the focus back to Iran during his comments, saying, quote, "We have to make sure Iran does not continue the malign activities," continuing that, "Blocking Iran is uttermost on our agenda for security, not merely for Israel, but I believe for Europe and the world as well," end quote.
In other international news, newly elected president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, has confirmed that he will move the Brazilian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem just as soon as he takes office. ILTV's Joy Gavijon is here to tell us more.
Hi, El. So as you said, everything seems to indicate that the move of the Brazilian embassy, it's really gonna happen. We still have 2 full months until Bolsonaro assumes the presidency in January 1st, but he has already confirmed the move. After receiving a congratulation call from Prime Minister Netanyahu and a lot of support from other Israeli officials, Jair Bolsonaro made the announcement, and this is what he said when they asked him about it, so let's take a look.
A questão da embaixada, quem decide a capital? Se o Brasil mudar a capital para o Rio de Janeiro, mudou, não é problema. Os outros países, obviamente, viriam para cá com suas embaixadas. Eu não vejo um clima pesado em você transferir, mudar a embaixada lá de Israel. Não vejo nenhum problema com a coisa. Não é uma questão de vida ou morte. Nós temos todo o respeito com Israel, temos com o povo árabe.
Yeah, and he also tweeted saying, quote, "As previously stated during our campaign, we intend to transfer the Brazilian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Israel is a sovereign state and we shall duly respect that," end quote.
It's very interesting. I mean, I know he also told Israel Hayom that the one to decide on the capital of Israel is Israel and not other nations.
Yes.
So he's really showing a big compromise in support for Israel. And after his statement, we'll just have to see if Netanyahu will travel to Brazil to attend his inauguration ceremony.
Exactly. Well, so far we know that Bolsonaro will come to Israel on his first international trip as the elected president, but there's no confirmation for Netanyahu's trip yet. So.
That's right. And so what are Palestinian and Muslim countries saying about the possible move of the embassy?
Yeah, well, as expected, they are not happy at all with this news. You know, after the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, both Guatemala and Paraguay followed this decision, even though Paraguay's new president backed down. But now another Latin country, and this time we're talking about the largest in Latin America, has decided to follow this United States and recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And this angered Muslim states. Now, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, released a statement condemning Bolsonaro's plan, claiming it's a violation of international laws and UN resolutions. Also, Hanan Ashrawi, an executive committee member of the PLO, condemned the move, saying that it's an illegal step and that it attempts against security and stability in the region.
But no one has taken any measures yet, right?
Yeah, no one has done anything so far, exactly.
Well, we're going to have to follow up on this. Hopefully, whatever the final decision is, it will happen with no violence. Thank you so much, Joy.
Of course.
On a related note, the British Labour Party has just voted against a draft motion to condemn the murder of 11 Jews at the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue. Only 2 Labour Party members backed the proposal, as it was ultimately voted down last week. The draft motion brought to light the dangers caused by anti-Semitic sentiments and hate speech and stated that they need to, quote, stand in solidarity with the Jewish community around the world and send our condolences to all those affected by the tragic events in Pittsburgh, end quote. But those who criticized the motion said that rather than isolate Jews and anti-Semitism, the motion should have condemned all racist acts. Members of the Labour Party allegedly claimed that the proposed condemnation of the murder of 11 Jews at a synagogue was just too focused on, quote, anti-Semitism this, anti-Semitism that, end quote. Meanwhile, the British police have opened an investigation against members of the Labour Party who are now facing criminal charges following anti-Semitic hate speech being revealed online. And Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn has for years been displaying anti-Semitic and anti-Israel views as well. Just this past summer, Corbyn was himself the subject of an investigation as to his long-standing ties to terrorists, anti-Semites, and Holocaust deniers. Back in 2014, for example, he attended a memorial service in Tunisia which paid respects to Palestinian terrorists and was photographed holding a wreath near a plaque dedicated to members of the Black September terrorist group, which murdered Israeli athletes during the 1972 Munich Olympics. His image is so bad, in fact, that a recent poll of British Jews showed 40% of respondents would seriously consider emigrating if Corbyn ever became Prime Minister.
What's your message?
Good
Can
morning.
you hold
How
the
nice
rift
to see
with
you
the
here.
Jewish community?
Nice to see you here.
Following the Pittsburgh massacre that left 11 dead and 6 wounded, Israeli lawmakers from across the political spectrum have vowed to support both Reform and conservative Jews in their quest to gain equal status in the State of Israel.
Yesterday, 18 Knesset members joined forces in an emergency session called It's Time for Equality to urge the government to recognize non-Orthodox movements in Israel. The invitation to the event, which was signed by 6 Knesset members, stated that, quote, it's time for a pact of brotherhood rather than a pact of blood among all the communities of the Jewish people. Some of the attendees included Yesh Atid chairman Yair Lapid, Likud member Amir Ohana, and Meretz Party chairwoman Tamar Zandberg. Not surprisingly, there were no representatives from the Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox parties. Rachel Azaria of the Kulanu Party said she was hopeful that the non-Orthodox movements would be recognized in Israel, but that we needed to be patient and allow it to happen on its own. She stated, quote, revolutions don't happen here in the Knesset, they happen first among the people. The executive director of the Reform movement in Israel, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, said he plans to draft new legislation to demand full equality and recognition. Lapid claimed that Jews cannot enjoy freedom of religion in Israel and, quote, so long as women cannot pray at the Western Wall and there's no change in the conversion law, we're doing an injustice to ourselves. Israel currently does not recognize marriages performed by Reform and conservative rabbis or conversions that take place under a non-Orthodox rabbi's supervision.
Another car crash on the deadly Route 90 near the Dead Sea in Jerusalem has brought the death toll on the highway to 17 over the past 3 weeks. On Sunday, 6 people were killed and 5 injured when a truck collided with a passenger shuttle at the Petzael junction.
Security camera footage shows the truck veered into the opposite lane while making a turn. The collision occurred when the shuttle attempted to avoid the truck and ended up crashing into it head-on. The 6 people who were killed, all Palestinians in their 30s, were trapped in the vehicle and removed by fire department squads, unconscious and with critical injuries. They were all pronounced dead at the scene. 4 others were injured and taken to Sheba Medical Center in Tel HaShomer. According to police reports, the truck driver, who was detained after the accident, has not been cooperating with police and has remained silent since his arrest. He has a long history of road violations and in this case is suspected of manslaughter. This is the second mass casualty accident on Route 90 in less than a week. Last Tuesday, the Attar family of 8 from Psagot, including 6 children, were all killed in a head-on collision in which the vehicle was flipped over and the family was trapped inside their burning car. And just a week before, 2 parents and their infant baby were killed on Route 90 when their car collided with a bus in a head-on collision. And later, this past Sunday, another accident on Route 90 ended with 4 additional injuries. Last week, following the deadly accident with the Attar family, Transportation Minister Yisrael Katz wrote on his Facebook page that, quote, the Ministry of Transportation invests tens of billions of shekels into paving new and safe roads throughout Israel, with a focus on the peripheral areas to the north and south, something that contributes directly to the decrease in fatalities from road accidents, unquote. Clearly, this road has been in dire need of attention and reform for a while. So now we'll have to see how quickly they respond to these most recent deadly accidents.
All right, in other news, today marks the 23rd anniversary of the death of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Thousands gathered in Tel Aviv's Rabin Square over the weekend to commemorate his death, and the event was organized by the Darkeinu movement and the National Union of Israeli Students. One of the organizers at Darkeinu said that the goal of the event was to allow everyone to find his place and to take down the political divide that separates people. But regardless, the event quickly turned from commemorative to political in nature. The audience demanded that Minister of Regional Cooperation Tzachi Hanegbi, who spoke at the weekend event, apologize for a 1995 rally against the Oslo Accords, which took place in Jerusalem a month before Rabin's murder and featured speeches from heads of the right-wing leadership. It was at that rally when the participants rioted to cancel the Oslo Accords, the same reasoning that drove Rabin's assassin Yigal Amir. Though Jewish Home Party head Naftali Bennett responded to the criticism against Hanegbi, saying the boos and demands against him were, quote, a shameful leftist demonstration, end quote. He added that the right didn't murder Rabin, Yigal Amir did. But then in related news, a recent poll shows that only 60% of Israelis actually think Yigal Amir is guilty of the assassination. This despite Amir killing Rabin at point blank and in front of hundreds of witnesses and cameras. Of the 4 choices given in the poll, 60% said Amir was the murderer, 7% said he was not the murderer, 13% said a different conspiracy theory, and 20% said they didn't know. This is evidence that perhaps the history books in Israel aren't doing nearly a good enough job. But at any rate, the demonstration over the weekend still went on relatively without a hitch. Israeli musician Aviv Geffen performed at the event as he did at the same rally in which Rabin was killed 23 years ago. And several other bands also took the stage, including Ethnics, Dana International, and Masada Yemi. Moving on, the United States has now offered its support for Israel's plan to link Haifa to the Arab Gulf nations via Transportation and Intelligence Minister Israel Katz's Tracks for Regional Peace plan. While there is much debate over who to attribute credit to regarding Israel's growing ties with her Arab neighbors, one thing is not in dispute, and that is that our relations with the Muslim states in the Gulf and on our border are objectively improving. First, with respect to the Tracks for Peace plan, United States Special Envoy Jason Greenblatt tweeted his support for the initiative as Minister Katz was presenting the details in Oman, a Muslim country which, by the way, does not have any public ties with Israel. This meeting also comes on the heels of Prime Minister Netanyahu's surprise visit to Oman last month. And meanwhile, Culture and Sports Minister Miri Reivew was in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates overseeing Israel's participation at the International Judo Grand Slam. And just as Minister Katz was returning to Israel, Israeli Minister Ayub Kara was heading off to the United Arab Emirates, where he attended an international conference. Now, it is worth noting that while the initial reason for these changes in attitudes towards Israel is that our regional interests, like fighting off Iran, align, these relationships have often become something more, though, and the Tracks for Peace plan shows that. On a related note, here in Israel, President Rivlin is soon expected to accept the credentials of the 2 new ambassadors from Jordan and Egypt, too. It may not look like much to you or me, but what you are about to see are 2,000-year-old engravings left upon the walls of a Roman period water cistern. The carvings were discovered by the Israel Antiquities Authority in Beersheba during an archaeological dig in preparation for a construction project, and they include images of ships and zoomorphs. The cistern itself is roughly 5 by 5.5 meters wide and 12 meters deep, and it includes a hewn and plastered staircase leading to the bottom. The walls of the cistern were also covered in plaster where the thinly engraved lines were discovered, and according to rock art and graffiti expert at the IAA, Dr. Davida Eisenberg-Degen, 13 ships were engraved with actual technical details, suggesting a real working knowledge of ship construction too. Eisenberg-Degen added that the cistern likely served a Roman residence nearby and was maintained and used all the way through the modern era. It was dirty and filled with some sediment, but among the ancient carvings, some ceramic shards and ammunition shells dating back to World War I were also found.
And now for the top 5 of the week with ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh.
Interestingly enough, more than half of the 2.9 million tourists that visited the Holy Land back in 2016 were Christian, which means it's time and long overdue that I give you guys ILTV's top 5 list of Christian sites to see in the Holy Land. First on the list is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, located in the Christian quarter of the Old City of Jerusalem. The church was built upon the site of Jesus' crucifixion, and the site contains the Calvary, where Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, and the tomb of Christ, where he was buried and resurrected. The energy in the church is undeniable and exciting even for non-believers. The Sea of Galilee is second on the list and is where some of Jesus' most well-known miracles took place, including when Jesus walked on water. There are many other holy sites to visit near, including the Capener National Park, sometimes called the Town of Jesus, the Church of Multiplication of Loaves and Fish, the Church of Peter's Primacy, Kersey National Park, and many, many more. So the Sea of Galilee is a must-see site, to say the least. Number 3 on the list is the Jordan River, or the Yardenit, is the famous site of Jesus' baptism. Today, visitors can take the opportunity to follow in Jesus' footsteps and also be baptized in the river. There's even a visitor center where travelers can shower, change, and get a white robe for their baptism. So, what are you waiting for? Fourth up is the 2,000-year-old city of Nazareth with 30 churches and monasteries. This city is known to be Jesus' childhood home and where he was probably raised, considering the phrase Jesus of Nazareth appears many times in Christian scriptures. Those who visit the city can also see what's known to be the official symbol of Nazareth, Mary's Well, which is where Mary was visited by Angel Gabriel to announce she would be giving birth to the Son of God. This city is definitely a highlight of Christian trips in Israel. Last but never least is an absolute must-to-see Bethlehem, which is the place of birth of Jesus. You can also find the Church of the Nativity there, which is one of the oldest surviving Christian churches. After you walk through the entrance to the church, which is known as the Door of Humility, and following the pathway, you will find yourself at the Grotto of the Nativity, which has been honored as the place where Christ was born. There are many, many, many more holy sites for Christians to visit here in Israel, but that'll be for another top 5. That's all for today's top 5. Back to you.
All right, that's it for this week's weekly review. Remember to follow us on Facebook for more news at Israel English News, and of course on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.